Just in case. All right. I think we are ready to go. So hello and welcome everybody to the Fullfunnel live podcast session on landing enterprise deals with our own Ryan Staley. And this is a special one because if you stay until the end of the session, Ryan offered to generously do some live deal coaching. So it would be cool if you just dropped us in the chat, whether you're hearing us, whether you're seeing us well, where you're dialing in from, and whether you would be interested in live coaching so we can get ready for you, okay? And so while waiting for your feedback there, I would just like to mention quickly that this is a live podcast interview. We do this either live podcast or webinars. We do them weekly for our community, the trenches. And we had guests like Pe Playa, Rand Fishkin, Chris Walker. So make sure to subscribe or join our B2B marketing community, the trenches. I'll drop the link in a moment in the chat. Yeah, thank you, Ishan. And let's go. I would say today we have our special guest, Ryan Staley from Whale Boss. And basically what Ryan did, he was leading a team that grew a business unit from 0 to 30 million in annual recurring revenue while adding 25 million plus in capital revenue, but with only 4 salespeople and without any marketing demand generation or lead generation. And he has now taken that and turned that into a system that is teaching founders and revenue leaders implement, and has agreed to share his knowledge with us today. So Ryan, very well welcome to our show.
What's happening, man? I'm excited. And I would welcome people as long as this doesn't mess up your flow. But if people want to go on video, that's cool too. Because then if you make faces or, give me a thumbs up or emotion, feel free to jump on video because I love seeing y'all on the screen. So if you're not comfortable, that's cool too, but helps me get a flow of kind of what's going on. But happy to be on, man. I love this format. This is so cool.
No, it's so much more fun also for the speakers. And if you can turn on the camera, please do so. It really helps, instead of just talking in the screen and seeing your names. Donna thank you, Donna.
There you go.
Very, very much appreciated. Awesome. All right. So if you haven't heard this, so there will be some live deal coaching. Stay until the questions. But in the meantime, let's just dive in. So Ryan, I would like just to help listeners to understand whether, what you're talking about actually might apply to their situation. So could you just share what kind of sales teams and what kind of deals do you usually work with?
Yeah. So it's really interesting because there's kind of 2 main groups that I'm attracting. And so it'll either be startup founders or that are earlier in the journey. And that's the type of people that I work with. So you look at folks that are founder-led sales, usually up to 10 million. That's usually who I work with, sometimes 10 to 20. And then on top of it, you look past that, there's a lot of chief revenue officers and CEOs that I work with when you go above that 10 million range. So that's who I serve right now. And really, there's a couple different kinds of solutions, but it's going to segue right into what we're talking about. Usually either someone wants to go up market, like they're like, hey, we want to start selling to big companies. We want to double our deal size. We want to basically bring in those whales. And so that's basically creating an entire go-to-market strategy, solution, design, and then implementing in their team. At the same time, there's other folks that have started to go in that direction and just want to pour gas on the fire and accelerate it. And so that's the other type of folks that are situations that I work with. And so that's all stemmed from kind of what you talked about and what we went through with moving there or that experiences that I had, because what I realized is there was basically how I started at that enterprise team. It was basically out of a demotion. I don't know if I ever told you that. Did I ever tell you that?
No.
Yeah. So
here,
and I'll keep my language clean on here. But basically, I was told that I was kind of a jerk to be around because I was working so many hours. And so I was getting results, but my team didn't really like me that much. And so basically they took my entire team away from me. And then they say, hey, Ryan, we want you to move up market. And we want to start getting large recurring revenue deals. And I'm like, all right, awesome. What's the game plan? They're like, go figure it out. I'm like, who's my team? They're like, go figure it out. They're like, who am I supposed to target? They're like, go figure it out. So that was all, like everything that I'm talking about today was born out of that combo with like numerous and tons of like 5 a.m., 6 a.m. flights, just chipping away, grinding away, going all over the Midwest, East Coast, Southeast, you name it. And basically it really, really was a character building part of my life, because at the same time, I was really, really struggling with, I put everything into work, and to get demoted was like soul crushing at that time. Some of my relationships were melting down. And so I had to reevaluate and build myself from the inside out, while also building an entire enterprise go-to-market strategy team and results. So that's what this was born out of. And there's more in there, but I looked at it and I added it up, and I'm like, okay, I spent probably 12 to 15,000 hours on like live customer meetings with this, because I did build a small team. And, I'm like, if I could share this with people so they don't have to go through all that pain, suffering, 5 a.m., 6 a.m. flights, worried about your job environment, then I'm doing something good for the world.
Wow, what a story, man. He didn't know that. So you talk about whales, you talk about enterprise sales, enterprise deals. Can you give us an idea, how is it different to sell to enterprise than otherwise? And also maybe share some of the most common mistakes that people make in enterprise sales.
Sure. And so I would say the biggest difference, if you look at it, we got it's hard. There's different delineation points and definitions of enterprise sales. So I'm going to define it in terms of how I look at it. And basically what I've started to see is that once you start to get over the $60,000 annual contract value mark, or maybe it's even $50,000 ACV, things start to materially change. And the reason for that is because decisions are made differently the higher the dollar amount, and the customers expect larger results. JC, I'm Whale Boss is the name of my company. So, and I'll try and keep track of the chat too. So if you want to pop things in there and here, I'll include that so we make it live and interactive. So I would say that's really like, if you start looking $50,000 and up, that changes the entire sales process. And what I mean by that is there's two kind of factors: time and the amount and quantity of people that are involved, right? So the other thing, and I should say that the third one is really the expectations of the buyer. If you're buying something for $99 a month or $399 a month or $1,000, $1,500, there's massively different expectations. Where if you're spending $10,000 a month, $20,000 a month, $30,000 a month. So the buyers have different expectations. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that people forget and make, is not aligning that, because if they choose your solution and it fails, a lot of times they might get fired. Or if they don't get fired, that's the perception in their head of what's going to happen. So they're basically looking at the result that your solution achieves as like a saber-toothed tiger sitting next to them. And like the old prehistoric days where if they don't execute on it, they're going to get their head bit off. So does that help give you some ideas in terms of mistakes?
Absolutely. So maybe let's maybe go into the meat of it, right? So we promised our audience that we are going to talk about these 3 strategies. So what are those strategies? Can you very quickly walk us through them?
Sure. Yeah. And there's a couple different ways I phrase this, but if you really, 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 truly look at it, there's some core components to it. So there's the perfect customer profile, which is essentially, it's kind of like your ideal customer profile, which I'm sure your audience is super familiar with that concept. It'd be like if your ideal customer profile had a baby with the Pareto principle, right? The 80-20 rule. So it's like, how do you look at the top 20% that produce 80% of your results? And the byproduct of that is absolutely amazing. You could actually cut your sales cycle and half sometimes if you leverage that appropriately, and double your deal size every year. So that's number 1. Number 2, what I would say as well is, if you look at it, what I call referrals for revenue. So that's the second one. And within there, it's so funny because most of the time founders look to grow their company through referrals, right? They start with their network, they grow their company. That's what gets them off the ground. But then, and this is what the beautiful thing is with enterprise deals or larger deals, you spend so much time developing and building that relationship. But what I'm starting to see happen is they leverage it from that 0 to 1 phase or 0 to 2 million phase. But then what happens is like everybody throws the baby out with the bathwater and they stop doing it, right? So systemizing all the trust, goodwill, and results you've created for customers to create leads for life through a continuous flow of opportunities and pipeline that come in by essentially leveraging your customer base, your biggest fans, and systemizing it. And the beautiful thing with that is it really cuts sales cycle times in half. And at the same time, the deal size goes up, close rates increase. I mean, there's so many huge valuable components. So that's number 2. And then number 3 is there's 2 core operating systems everybody needs to install if you're doing a mid-market or upsize deal. And that's what I call on the front end. I call it the whale scale operating system. A lot of sales methodologies are what I think dealing with sales symptoms instead of sales systems. I just tongue-tied myself. Sales symptoms instead of sales systems, right? And so what that is that's not just looking at the tactical components or the sales process and what you say in meetings. There's also a layer of strategy that people completely ignore. So that's dropped in the middle. That's on the front end. And that's when you start off or pre-customer acquisition. And then there's a post-customer acquisition where, once again, just like the referrals, you invested all this time, this energy, this trust in basically creating results for your customers. And then a lot of times they just throw it over to a customer success team, and there's not a designed secondary sales process built in there. And that's how we created that additional 25, 30 million in revenue on top of the 30 million ARR with only 4 salespeople, because we leveraged that lever on the back end, and deals close, once again, exponentially faster for bigger amounts with less friction. So
I love it. I love it. And so you, just to kind of sum it up. So you mentioned the perfect customer profile. Second one was referrals for revenue, and the 2 operating systems, one on the front to land, and then the second one to expand. So love all 3. And I mean, if we dive into it, like the perfect customer profile, why do you call it perfect? Like, how is it different than the ideal customer profile? And like practically, how do you create it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different levers you could pull to do this, but it's so interesting, Vlad. I've talked to companies that are 30 million, 100 million, 5 million, 1 million. It doesn't matter the size. A lot of times what people do is they'll set up their ICP and they might revisit it every year and look at it. But what happens is success leaves clues, right? So there's always a trail of opportunities that exist if you continually go back and look at the data. And so what I mean by that is, what you look at is, well, let me give you a quick example. Have you heard of Snowflake at all?
No.
Snowflake. Okay. So Snowflake had the largest software IPO in history. And I think Warren Buffett invested $350 million in it. First IPO he's invested on in like 20 or 30 years, something crazy like that, right? So they're blowing it up. I think so. Yeah, Jim, it might be, it's cloud. I mean, some of those companies are so big, they have like 15 different solution offerings, but I think anyways, they got valued at like 80 billion or something ridiculous, or I might be butchering it, but anyways, long story short, largest IPO in software history. And one of the things that they did, and I'll segue why this is related to the perfect customer profile, is basically they do what's a 50 by 50 method. Okay. And so what I mean by that is they look at their 50 biggest wins continuously and their 50 fastest wins, right? So what are the deals that close? What are the biggest and what are the fastest? And then they get super deep on why that happened. And there's patterns and clues that exist that help you accelerate the speed of a deal, right? And they have all these complex, software stacks and different departments and all these different people focused on it, right? So what I did unknowingly is I leveraged my version of that before Snowflake even existed. And I did what's called version, the 5x5x5 method, right? And we did that when I was creating the go-to-market strategy. And this is what I discovered. This is the beautiful thing. So I discovered that when I looked at all our existing clients, that when I was trying to start that enterprise team, that there was two verticals that existed. One vertical had a deal size of $100,000 a month, right? That was their biggest opportunity in that vertical. Another vertical had a deal size that was closer to like 20 or 30,000 on average. Okay. They both had the same amount of time to close. So they're both about 9 months, but one was 5x than the other. I started to look deeper and I saw another pattern of this where besides just the top deal, there was a lot of other deals that were really large that closed in the same amount of time. So I'm like, and that wasn't the primary focus of our organization. The primary focus was on the $20,000 to $30,000 vertical. And that's just because that's what we've always done, right? But the market changed and we didn't adapt to it. So what it essentially is looking at the 5 biggest deals you have, the 5 fastest to close, and the 5 biggest losses that you have, right? And so basically that's the steps that I take when I'm working with organizations. And then it goes all the way down from the ownership structure. Are they publicly traded, privately, VC owned? Are they PE backed? Those all factor and influence the top priorities of the C-level executives. So then that filters down all the way down to the trigger events that create that action and why they bought. And so that's what feeds in that 5x5x5. And when you do that, you'll find out, especially with the fastest, like I was working with a customer the other day and they wanted to move up market. Their average deal size was, I think maybe 50,000. Well, we found out that their first year deal for their fastest, or first year deal size for their fastest deals was like 250K or 300,000. And they were walking right back past that. They weren't looking at that, right? And so what that does is it brings into focus what those opportunities are.
All right. Love it. So how do you use it practically? Is it about acquisition, how you target? Is it about qualifying, disqualifying? Like practically in which part of the process do you use the perfect customer profile?
I think it's targeting and qualifying.
Okay.
Right. And then you keep iterating. Like even for my own business, like I'm hyper tuned in and focused on that. And so what I'm starting to see is there's a lot of patterns that exist of what people want, why they want it, and when they want it, but it's different at different revenue ranges, And so it's the same with anybody's business that produces a tangible outcome.
No, I think we do this probably every quarter. We are definitely like reviewing that, but always keeping track on that because that makes the biggest difference. It makes the biggest difference. And one of the things that we also do is we also like kind of always interview our customers. We have that built into our processes. And one of the things that we ask them is like, how do you discover, how do you go about finding a solution like ours, like finding a provider like ours? And for a lot of times, basically what they tell me, well, it's not about Googling. It's not about that. We go for referrals. We ask other people. We ask like my network or whatever that is, right? And so, which brings me to the next part, which is referrals for revenue. So it's really, really important, like you said. Maybe we do it at the beginning, but after a while, we kind of drop the ball. So could you walk us through your system practically? And this one is for Jim, I would say.
Okay. Yeah. So you said for Jim?
Yeah, we spoke about it. We spoke about it on LinkedIn, and I promised him that we'll dive into this. And so that's
all right, Jim. This one's for you, man. So yeah. So something that happens in what I've seen in the market all the time is if you look at HubSpot's number one source of leads is from word of mouth, right? It's more than Google search, it's more than any paid search, it's more than anything else they do. On top of it, I sat in a room with 5,000 other entrepreneurs, and Tony Robbins was there talking about business aspects, and he identified really what the he asked the question. He's like, how many people in here have a systemized approach for capturing customer referrals that you track on an ongoing basis, right? And of the I don't know, 5,000, maybe 500 people stood up. He goes, okay, I want you to stay standing if you have 2 ways to track that. And about 200 people sat down. So there's only 300 people left in the room. And he goes, This is the number one single best way to double the revenue size of your company. And so I'm like, that's an interesting concept. I'm like, but maybe it was just the room I'm in, right? So I started looking and talking to other businesses, $100 million, $1 billion business, 50 million, 30, 20 million, 10. Nobody has anything set up. I'm like, why is this? This doesn't make any sense, right? So I started to look deeper and deeper into it. And one of the things that I saw is I looked at some really, really successful companies because I like to model people, right? So I was looking at Tesla. And one of the things that I discovered was that Tesla got 1/3 of their Model S sales. That's the initial, high-end $110,000 Tesla that they were selling. 1/3 of them through customer referrals. I'm like, this is amazing. There's got to be something here, right? Slack got 97% of their users from it. Dropbox got 35% of their month-over-month growth from it. I'm like, okay. So basically what happened was I started looking deeper and deeper into it. And the way to do it, or the opportunity, is that, yeah, Jim, and Gmail grew that way too, right? So there's the B to B side, or the B to C side. And I'm like, why isn't this being leveraged on the enterprise side? And so, or the mid-market side? And it's because it's not automated. And so what I did is I looked it up, and I started just doing research. And I thought back in time, I'm like, what really worked for us when we were selling big deals, when I was managing that team that we grew? And then I'm like, I didn't even think of this, but the whole reason why we got a $20 million deal from Amazon cold was from a referral. And here's the thing, Vlad, it wasn't even from a customer. It was from a prospect that wasn't going anywhere. So I'm like, okay, there's something here, right? We could go with this. So I created my own framework that I help companies implement, because it does two things. Like I said at the beginning, it helps cut the sales cycle in half. And at the same time, people are getting flooded with so much information, content, details. It's a way to cut through it, right? Because you're transferring the know, like, and trust. So imagine this. Essentially what you're doing is you're getting the benefit and control of outbound with targeting, but you're getting the receptiveness of an inbound lead, and you're combining them together. So the 4-step framework that I use for this is what I call the 4 Ps, right? So there's the pathways. That's the type of incentive that you create for the referee, I should say, or the referrer, right? And so there's a lot of different ways you can go. The number one biggest mistake that people make is they think money is the number one reason why people refer. That's not. It's usually the least beneficial. Number 2 is the peaks. And so with the peaks, every buyer has emotional highs they go through during the sales process, right? I kind of look at it like when you first fall in love with someone and they ask you to do something, and you'll do whatever they ask, right? It doesn't matter how stupid or ridiculous it is most of the time. That's why people get catfished online. They think they're in love, right? That's why I think there was like $350 million in money people got conned out of because of like an online relationship where, anyways, I'm getting off track here, but so that's the second point, right? The peaks, right? So how do you ask at the right time when the buyer's experiencing, or the prospect's experiencing, that emotional high? Okay, then there's the process. What's the existing sales process that the team is running? And how do you align those peaks and match up, like with a heart rate monitor, with the peaks, so that you're asking at the right time and it's very simple to implement? And then the last step, but definitely not least, is persuasion. Okay. And a great example of this, which are you familiar what a group of turkeys are that are the babies? You know what the baby turkeys are called?
No.
You're like, where the hell are you going with this? It's called the clutch, right? So they could have poulettes. I thought it was clutch. So where I read it was clutch, right? And so what happens is a mama turkey could have, I think, up to 14 or 17 babies every year. And so when that happens, and poulettes might be what each individual is called, but a clutch is the whole group of them, right? So what happens is with that, there's one unconscious way that the mama bird communicates with the baby birds. And the weird thing is, if that isn't connected on and it isn't executed on, then the turkey will identify whether they should ignore that baby, kill that baby, or care for that baby. Those are the three things that go through its head. And, the number one thing that the baby birds say is cheep, cheep, right? So they did an experiment with basically like a stuffed animal that was the turkey's largest nemesis. It was the polecat. Made that stuffed animal mimic that sound, and then the turkey took care of it. So the reason why I'm telling you this story, you're like, where the hell, how is this relevant? And I hope we didn't lose like 10 people because of telling this story, but it's because the turkey taps into its subconscious automated response. And that's for caring for its own children. So humans do the same thing. 90% of what we do is automated, and only 10% is basically on your prefrontal cortex. So what we do is we tap into that with subconscious and integrate the playbooks for that to execute on that.
All right.
So
give us a concrete example. Like, so you have just implemented a solution. They're happy. They're like somewhere at their peak, right? So what happens next? What do you do?
Yeah, preventing cognitive biases, exactly. So they're right at their peak. So it's asking specifically, right? You want to ask for names, not open-ended. And then at the same time, like if you're looking at that, and what I've noticed, the number one automatic response, and this goes back to like, are you a Game of Thrones fan at all or no?
My wife is.
Your wife is? You're not? All right. If we got any Game of Thrones fans in the chat, pop it in the chat if you are. Give me a Y or an N, right? But basically, there you go. A little thumbs up, Jim. So okay, so everybody's jiving with me except for Vlad. So basically what happens on Game of Thrones is they're going through, and a Lannister always pays his debts, right? That's what they say all the time. So we're hardwired going back to the caveman days. Vlad, we got to get you into sports too, man. So anyways, it's hardwired back into the caveman days, cave lady days, whatever, where we feel responsible from a community down to a community level and a human nature level to repay our debts if someone did something for us. It's part of community. That's why communities are doing so well right now. And so essentially what happens, Vlad, if you're looking at this, like what I notice, if you talk to someone and let's say you help them with something specific that's unexpected, customized to them, they get surprised and you do it right in front of you execute on it right there, right? Their number one response that they say is,
what can I do for you?
What can I do for you, right?
Yeah.
Then you drop it, right? So they just hit their peak. Yeah, reciprocity, you got it. And that's in Robert Cialdini's books. So a lot of the frameworks that I use are built in like 30 years of psychological research, behavior design research, like from Atomic Habits. So anyways, I don't want to get off track, but that's an example.
Mm-hmm. And then you said you have to make it easy for them, right? So what do you do instead of basically asking them, can you give me a referral? You probably already come up with some people that would like to get introduced. And what else can you do to make it even more easy?
Well, basically you give them a list of the people you want to be introduced to.
Yeah. And I think I heard you say also, which I really liked, was basically you asked them, would you mind if I emailed John, Jim, and Karen with you in CC and ask them for an intro, right? So even they don't have to do anything, right?
Exactly. You make it as simple as possible, so it's a low friction activity. That's why Amazon grew so much once they had the one click buy button. Because they didn't have to go through 5 steps. So if it's one single step, super easy, low friction, they're happy with you, you're at their peak, you've hacked into their subconscious. And that sounds like manipulative. It's not manipulative. You're helping them first.
Absolutely. No, I love the referrals for revenue. And the third point, or the third part of the system, was the sales operating system. We were talking about the two. So let's talk about the whale scale on the front one, landing before expanding. So what goes into that?
Yeah, and so it's really interesting because like if you look at like, let's just take medic, right, or MedPick. It's a qualification system, right? It's a qualification system for you internally. It's it's facing the seller, it's facing the seller's organization. And there's some good qualifiers that they have in there. However, once again, it's focused on you. It's not focused on the buyer or their journey or what they have to go through. There's pieces of it that are, but essentially it's not looking at how you orchestrate a large number of people to come to the same conclusion and want to press and promote your deal. So the answer to that is you do have a process with entry and exit criteria. And at the same time, then the second thing you got to look at is the strategy. And I look at the strategy as two kind of main areas, and I call them decision-making funnels. And with those decision-making funnels, there's the business strategy that goes up. And then there's also the relationship strategy. So think of it this way, and I'm trying to paint a mental picture since there's going to be listeners, there's people that are looking at me, but just like you would a funnel, that's how you look at it from, let's say, the C-level going down, right? The C-level has a wider range of responsibility. The more you go down, the more narrow the responsibility, the more specific it is. Okay. So look at that. Now, imagine that the CIO is at the top of the funnel, the decision-making funnel. That filters down multiple levels. However, within an organization, there's multiple decision-making funnels that exist. There might be a finance decision-making funnel, a CIO, IT decision-making funnel, a sales decision-making funnel, a CMO. And so what people neglect to do is they look at it, okay, how's the decision made? What are they doing? Right. And those are the logical reasons. What's the tangible financial outcome? What's the benefit to the company? What do the shareholders want? Right. That's the business side. The other side of strategy, and this is what people do, I think, tactically ad hoc, is they don't really design a relationship strategy around, well, first of all, going back to the business strategy, let me finish it, put a bow on this real quick, is they don't prioritize necessarily which departments to focus on and allocate time accordingly based on who owns the budget now and who will own the budget after they do your solution. That one tip alone, that was the difference between me getting my team and I getting an $18 million deal or losing an $18 million deal. That one question. So remember that one. Now on the relation side, we already hit the logic side. Now this is the emotional side. This doesn't make any sense sometimes, right? We're emotional beings. We don't make sense. We make decisions. And so this is more tapped into what is the specific outcome each individual person that is involved in the deal wants to happen for their status gain. That could be a promotion. That could be a bonus. That could be just to look good in front of their boss, right? So there's that, but then there's also the trust factor. Remember I mentioned earlier that one of the biggest reasons why people don't get deals, or I should say one of the biggest reasons why deals don't get done, is because of the fact that if they make a mistake, they get fired, right? Now, it's not always that, but that's what's going on in people's heads. And so the number one thing you have to do is establish that trust over a long period of time, and confidence in what you're going to do is going to really, really provide the result that you're looking for. And so you have to do that at the individual person level within decision-making funnel, from the C-level to the mid-level to the end user. But then you have to do it across multiple departments and then integrate them together so that you're hitting on everybody's win. And at the same time, they trust you, love you. And it's basically like a lot of what's taken in marketing and taking it to the next level at the human factor through one-on-one conversations. And I'll give you a really specific example of this. So, and I'll wrap it up because I want to leave time for Q&A. But basically what it is the first enterprise deal I got when I was a rep, it ended up being $200,000 a month. So it was a big deal. And it built to that over time. However, the first deal that we got, which was for like $30,000, I never actually met the person live. But what I did do is every single call that I had with that person and the other people, I systematically learned more about what they cared about as a human being and what they were passionate about, what was important with their family, every single call and interaction. And over a period of 8 months, that stacks. So you're a completely different person and different type of relationship at the beginning than at the end. So that's the part I think a lot of people neglect. And then the last but not least is the execution. What questions to ask to who at what time and in what step in the process. Okay, so it's question architecture, and then also asking the questions the right way. You could ask the same thing 2 different ways, and you'll either get, oh, I can't share that with you, or you'll get, oh, well, I'll tell you what it is. This is what's going on. And so you drop that into the process, have the strategy wrapped around it, and then that's what that operating system is. Same thing on the back end, where you do it essentially with reviews. There's a way to do it with reviews and periodic check-ins. And then once again, asking the right questions to uncover the new problems that the customer has as they grow. Because once you solve one problem, typically 5 to 10 new problems are created, and then you keep solving problems and become a trusted partner.
All right. I think we can go into Q&A, unless you wanted to add something to wrap it up.
No, I think, that's the high point. I could talk about this stuff for hours and days and weeks, but I know we have limited time. And so what I would say is, if in the Q&A, if you have a deal that you want to go through, we could do that. Or if you have questions specifically on anything we covered, or even anything we didn't cover, I'm wide open to serve you in any way possible.
All right, let's go. So please just drop a comment in the chat if you have a question, if you have a deal that you would like to discuss. And second, Donna, awesome. Well, you know what I would suggest, Donna, is just turn on the mic, unmute yourself, and go for it.
Hi, I'm Donna Valerio. I'm CEO of Media Mash. We are a video marketing and live stream shopping platform. And we are ready to launch, and I need beta clients so that I can gather some KPIs and proof of concept and all that great stuff. And I feel like I'm stuck like chicken and egg syndrome right now.
Yeah. So in terms of doing that, Donna, which is good to see you again. It's been a while since we talked. So thanks for coming on. And so so let me ask you this. Do you have the demand nailed down? Are you getting the actual calls and the appointments?
No, I'm doing all the outreach myself.
Okay. But what I'm saying is, like, are you getting the cycles there? Are you having the conversations and
not enough. I need to work on that. I'm kind of like a one-man band right now. So it's,
Okay. So, so there's a lot of ways to do that. And the beautiful thing about what I remember about your solution, it might have morphed, but
it has morphed a bit. Yeah.
Something that's really cool that I see working, and because your deal size is relatively larger, correct? Your average deal size?
Like $100K a year, probably.
Yeah. So something that could be really cool that maybe you could do, and I don't know if you're doing this, so slap me if you are, but this will get you a lot of cycles, is if you start interviewing your clients on your platform and then sharing that, and basically leveraging that as a means to create that trust and interest in what you do. And then they actually see how you repurpose their content. And then basically those could be sales calls if you target the right customer. Have you done anything like that at all?
I'm starting a video blog, a video podcast. I have my first interview tomorrow. He's not quite a customer yet, but yeah, that's interesting because I know I need to drink my own Kool-Aid and create more video. I have an interesting sales call next Friday, actually, with a woman who owns a female TV station, an online TV station. So, and that just came through a networking thing. So, yeah.
I mean, if you look at your targets like that, and then you could actually set up, I don't know, like a target, like I'm going to interview 12 people for my podcast in a month. And then what you could do throughout the conversation when you're interviewing is just find out what their biggest problems are in terms of media, right? Getting their name out there. What are they doing? How do they try and solve those? So you could weave those conversations into, and then put that out there. And then what'll happen is, like, people love promoting themselves. Like, I'm starting to realize this too, because it kind of happened on accident with my podcast. I had founders that were like, hey, so what do you do? Like afterwards, like, how do you help people? I'm like, oh, I do this and this. We could talk about it more if you want. And they're like, yeah, I'd like to. So, I mean, not everybody, but some people. And I'm like, and that happened on accident. I'm like, what if I actually like focused on this and really got laser targeted?
I didn't think of it from that angle, but that's kind of genius, because I have been reaching out on LinkedIn to people and they are really responsive to like being interviewed. So yeah, if I do more of my targets and then kind of use them to be like, oh. Okay.
I can
Awesome.
testify to this. I decided back in October, I decided to just get connected in my home market, which was Belgium, to the top B2B tech companies, like the largest, the biggest companies and the top marketing people there. And I built a list, like I used kind of the 555 or whatever method to build a list, and started reaching out, had 20 accounts on the list, and had to stop after 11. And I was inviting them to the podcast interview, right? And I had to stop after 11 because 8 of them already said yes. And I'm sure I could have gotten even more of them, but I just didn't have the time or capacity to do more than 8 at that time. So it works extremely well. Just like what worked for me also was to do the like 2 things. Like first doing like referrals, and by that I mean just asking somebody who knows them. It doesn't have to, for example, I would reach out to a CEO and I would tell them, hey, who would be the right person to talk to there, even though I maybe didn't have the relationship with the CEO. But then the CEO would say, yeah, of course, I don't know, talk to the head of marketing. And of course, once they reach to the head of marketing saying, hey, the CEO told that you're the right person, they couldn't say no. So these kind of referrals, whether I had somebody who I knew from the company and then asked, worked extremely well. And the second was that because it was like an interview, a podcast interview, I did what I always call like a pre-production call, right? And the pre-production call is like helps you nail the topics and you present them in the best possible light, but also of course, gives you the opportunity to do the discovery that Ryan mentioned, actually, not the sales call, but let's say the discovery. How are you doing it right now? What our biggest challenges are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So these 2 things helped me a lot in building very important relationships, and actually just closed one of these guests recently. So
Nice.
definitely works really well.
I love both of those examples. And I think you guys would be great on my podcast. So I will be contacting you.
Cool. Excellent.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And like, that's the thing too, Donna, like you'll start to get, you'll start getting a bunch of cycles in, and then you'll be able to determine a lot faster, like what's working, what's not, and just like document all the objections. And what the really cool thing is like, you'll find patterns to why people aren't interested or what's not hitting, that's the other thing.
Right.
It'll massively accelerate that. So
thank you so much.
cool.
So we have somebody who just joined. They couldn't join. They were busy. Roman, you just joined. You were busy with the other call, I know. So do you want to ask your question? Please come on. Put your camera on. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. I'm in between chairs of great offerings from Vlad and Andre, so have been in another call. So thanks for letting me in and asking the question. Very concrete question. We are currently having a deal with a corporation in the pharmaceutical industry. Mm-hmm. And we're doing a project, a 5 figures project in a local market. And basically, it is about rolling out digital initiatives based on global strategies. And now we got a contact to the regional team, and they very much appreciated our push forward with the pilot projects in the local market. And now it's a little bit, the conversation is stalling. So for sure, we are very interested in actually moving up the chain and going into the regional market or even global market. Also with the pilot and the good a case that we have done in the local market. But the conversation is stalling, and it's just not moving forward in the way we want it to. And it's kind of, they are interested, but yeah, they appreciate it, what we have done in the local market. And so, yeah, this is our biggest problem at the moment.
Okay. So like if you're talking, and how long have you been doing the pilot for?
The last year, for a year.
Okay. So that's what I would say is the one mistake I see a lot with big deals is they have open-ended pilots. And so like for you, and I'll give you a couple, I'll give you like how I would do it in the future and then how you would do it now, right? So you're at the local level. What's the highest title you're engaged with?
The customer experience manager there, and he is involved. He's basically reporting to the UX manager regional, where we also have the contact with. So,
okay. So, and what's the deal size, like ballpark, if they go forward?
You mean in the global deal or the local deal?
The local deal.
Mid 5 figures.
Okay, so mid 5. So that's a big deal. So here's what I would say. The number one thing you got to do is get higher. So they appreciate it, but a customer manager, if it's mid 5 figures, if we're talking what, 50K, let's just say it's 50K, right? We were working in a deal before with Lowe's like home improvement, which is like a Fortune top 60, and a senior director only who was responsible for a $30 million budget. Guess how much he could sign off on?
Yeah, probably ridiculous, I guess.
It's like, no, it was $50,000. So one thing is, the reason why I'm telling you this is because people, especially with bigger organizations, they get lured by sexy titles or what that person's responsible for. However, what you'll see, and it's not like that at every company, but a lot of times the thresholds are way lower for someone to sign off than you would think they are. So the number one thing I would try and do is leverage your contact to get a level higher and say, we need to have this pilot come to an end, or we need to create a go forward plan. Been doing this for a year. And so, we'd like an audience with, and you got to understand the levels, right?
That's an interesting point, because actually we are a level higher, but not in the local opco, but in the regional opco. So
okay,
would you say then also going higher in the local opco?
Yeah, I mean, whoever would own the pilot, that's where you need to get higher. Like, who would own the budget? Because like the regional one might not own it. If the regional does own the budget and it rolls up, no, okay, yeah, then you got to get higher locally. So that's the number one A, B, and C priority that I would have, because you might be doing the right message with the right solution, but it's kind of like screaming in an abandoned building right now. That person probably doesn't have the juice to sign a mid 5-figure deal for that. So that's step one. And then moving forward, what I would always do is Roman, is basically have a closed-ended pilot. And so what I mean by that is you'll do a pilot. However, it's only for 3 months, and these are the success KPIs that you have. And basically, as long as you don't cancel, then it automatically rolls into the agreement. So then basically that forces a decision at that point, and it might create some objections up front, but that's good, because then you're not in a situation where you're doing a pilot for a year and it's open-ended and you don't know what's going on, and you've invested all the time and energy.
Yeah. So just to get your view on that might also be a contractual problem, because we were not hired as with a actually project to deliver, but like on a consultant retainer model, where the project, where the pilot project was part then of the retainer, and so basically we are not measured by results of the projects, and so we don't. That's difficult to go then from there. But would you recommend that for the future, then going like with a fixed end, beginning and end date?
Yeah, and the whole point of a pilot is to test the concept. I mean, it's proof of concept, right? Does this work or does this not? It's linear. And so you want to get them in there like, okay, well, we'll prove if it works. If it works, though, we expect you to move forward, because we're investing all our time, resources, money, energy up front. If they balk at it, or they say, we can't do that, then they were never going to say yes anyways, right? So it's a good way to really protect your time, but then see how serious they are. Or what usually happens too is like, well, we got to get another level of approval for that. So it forces the conversation for you to get higher faster versus, going that route and working that out.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thanks.
Cool.
Hey, so we have Praveen who raised his hand. Praveen, you want to go?
What's up, Praveen?
Hey, see you around. So just to add a point on top of it, right? So one of the challenge with a proof of concepts is that a lot of them go counterproductive, as you rightly said. Right? So probably the way of getting that really serious on ground is making that a paid proof of concept, like some level of dollar attached to it, which essentially means that someone is actually taking ownership. Because at the end of the day, no matter how many KPIs that we attach, something that I've gone through personally, people just don't care if there is no real interest. And unfortunately or fortunately, we come to know only when we start burning fingers. That's a disappointment. Thought I'll make one. But on top of it, so my question is more from a generalist perspective. There are certain products or services, especially products, right? So where time to value is not immediate. So I come from a cyber background. We have a product called Blue Sapphire. Now, unless an organization is under cyber attack, you don't get to see the value of product. And that essentially is a challenge, especially when you go ahead and have these conversations, try and pitch the product, especially in a space where there is more supply than demand in the cybersecurity space. Everyone can do everything. How do we structure that conversation out? And more importantly, how do we build that trust from a point where the product like a product which is structured around cybersecurity is not designed to deliver immediate values. You know what I mean? I hope I was able to structure the question properly, Brandon.
So yeah, are you running into the issue where people don't want to talk to you until like stuff's blowing up, like everything's melting down?
Majority of times, yes. So that's the challenge, because cyber essentially has always been considered as a want rather than a need. Something burns big time, then people realize what is the importance of cyber, and then they are more willing to have a conversation, strike a chord, and move forward.
Yeah. So I would say for two aspects. If we're talking like pipeline, I would definitely leverage referrals for existing customers you already have, because that's really, because like cybersecurity is kind of like if you have a really bad rash, and you get cybersecurity, you don't want to like go out and like post on a forum like, I have this really bad rash in my lower area. Like who's got any ideas, right? You would only talk to probably a close friend about that. So some people look at cybersecurity as the same way, because they're like, well, if people think I'm vulnerable, then they're not going to buy us. It's terrible for our brand, all that, right? So pipeline, I would look at it that way. In terms of like sales messaging, something that you could leverage is fear. Like look at what life insurance is. Life insurance, you're not going to die tomorrow, but people buy it because they're afraid their loved ones aren't going to be supported if you go away. So cybersecurity is kind of the same thing. It's like, okay, like with the messaging, you could really hammer home all the companies that waited and what happened when they waited, right? So if they would have took a proactive, they would have avoided this. If they did this, they would have avoided this, right? And in your line of questioning, you ask them a lot of questions to help them self-discover, like all the mistakes that they're making, everything that's jacked up, and then you layer that on top of it. So they're like, okay, I don't know this, I don't know this, I don't know this. And it's like, oh, well, that's the same thing that melted down Home Depot, and they lost, $3 billion off their stock price. The CEO got fired, and this is what happened. You're set up the same way as them. So, do you want to get ahead of this, or do you just want to wait? You know what I mean? Like that's a little aggressive, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about.
The mistakes is a great reflection, something that I will take my workbook and start working upon. But you're right. So fear is one factor on which we've been dependent upon. They've been great business, especially with COVID. People have realized it is a need. But having said that, it is actually a challenge for someone who has sold cybersecurity, or even for that fact, fintechs who are more into the insurance space and so on and so forth, to showcase the actual value. Thank you so much, Brandon.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, Praveen, for coming up and asking the question. So we unfortunately will have to start wrapping up. And before we go, just want to ask Ryan. So first of all, thank you so much. It was amazing. It was gold. I really enjoyed myself. And thank you also for helping our audience. Really appreciate it. But before we close, can you just tell us like where people can find you, where they can learn more about, what you're doing, and what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah. So number one, I have a podcast, and I actually had the pleasure of interviewing Vlad on the podcast. So check it out. It's called The Scale Up Show. It's on Apple, Spotify, and Praveen. I actually did a whole episode on leveraging fear in your sales process. So you might want to check it out. It was probably about a month and a half ago, maybe 3 weeks ago even. So there's a whole episode that I did on it, but feel free to check it out, subscribe, like it. On top of it too, link if you don't listen to podcasts, which you shouldn't be listening if you do. I'm also on LinkedIn publishing almost daily on there. So
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so that's pretty much it. So hit me on either of those channels, and love helping people. So it's awesome. This is a really cool format, man. I'd love to do this again. You and I got to do this for like my people, and have you on. And I love you and Andre to do like maybe a marketing thing. It'd be cool having you guys both on